On a freezing night, when the wind cut like a blade and the land felt lifeless, an Apache woman stood outside a lonely ranch with her 3 small children pressed against her. Snow clung to her worn clothes, and hunger showed clearly in her tired eyes. The children could barely stand, their lips turning pale, their bodies shaking with cold. She had walked for hours, knowing this was her last chance. The ranch house glowed faintly in the darkness, warm yet uncertain, like hope that might disappear at any moment. Fear filled her heart because she knew the stories. Cowboys did not trust Apache people, and kindness was rare on this land. Still, she stepped forward, holding her youngest closer as the wind screamed around them. When the door finally opened, her voice trembled, not from the cold alone, but from desperation, as she asked one simple question that carried the weight of life and death and would decide whether her children would see another sunrise or fade into the frozen night forever. The cowboy was known as a quiet man who lived alone on the edge of the land, far from towns, far from people, and far from trouble. He spoke little and trusted even less, carrying his past like a shadow that never left him. Years of harsh winters and dangerous encounters had taught him one rule: survive first, question later. Many feared him because he kept his distance, while others respected him for the way he faced life without complaint. He had crossed paths with outlaws, wild animals, and angry men, and each time he walked away stronger but colder inside. Nights like this usually meant silence, a warm fire, and memories he tried to forget. He believed nothing could surprise him anymore. Yet as the storm raged outside and the knock echoed through his cabin, something unfamiliar tightened his chest. He did not know it yet, but this moment would test not his strength, not his courage, but the deepest part of his humanity in a way no danger ever had. The door stood open just enough for the firelight to spill into the storm, and in that dim glow the Apache woman finally lifted her face, revealing eyes dulled by exhaustion yet still burning with quiet determination, while her youngest child clung to her chest, too weak to cry, and the other 2 stood frozen behind her, their small hands clenched tight, as if letting go would make them disappear, and the cowboy watched every detail in silence, noticing the cracked skin on her hands, the torn edges of her blanket, and the way her shoulders trembled not only from cold but from fear of what his answer might be. And for a long second no one spoke, the wind filling the space between them like a warning. And then she took a careful step forward, her boots barely making a sound on the wooden porch, her voice low and respectful, carrying none of anger or demand, only a fragile hope that had survived too many losses. And she asked if they could warm themselves, not daring to meet his eyes. Because she had already prepared herself for refusal, for harsh words, for the door to close, because that was what the world had taught her to expect, and the children shifted behind her, sensing the weight of the moment, while the cowboy felt something twist inside him, a feeling he had buried years ago beneath layers of caution and solitude. And he remembered other nights when mercy had been denied and how those memories still followed him like ghosts. And as the fire cracked behind him and the cold pressed forward, he understood that whatever choice he made would not fade with the storm. Because this was not about rules or fear anymore. It was about whether he could live with himself after seeing what stood before him. And the woman tightened her hold on her child as seconds stretched painfully long, her breath shallow, her mind already bracing for the worst, while the children's shivering grew more violent. And the night seemed to lean closer, waiting for his decision, and in that fragile silence, with nothing but truth between them, the cowboy realized that danger had many faces, but regret was the one that lasted forever, and the woman, standing on the edge between survival and loss, did not know it yet. But the answer she was about to receive would reshape not only this night, but every life connected to it from that moment forward. The cowboy froze where he stood, his hand still resting on the rough wooden door, feeling the pull of 2 worlds closing in on him at once, because every instinct he had learned on this land warned him that helping strangers, especially Apache people, could invite danger he might not survive. Yet another voice, quieter but heavier, reminded him that closing the door would leave 3 children to face a night that showed no mercy. And his mind filled with memories he had spent years trying to bury, moments when fear had made men cruel and silence had cost innocent lives, and he wondered when survival had slowly turned him into someone who avoided responsibility by calling it caution. And as the fire crackled behind him and the cold air bit into his skin, he felt the weight of the woman's patience pressing harder than any threat. Because she did not beg or argue, she simply waited, trusting a stranger with everything she had left, and that trust unsettled him more than anger ever could. And he imagined the trouble that might follow if others discovered he had opened his home, whispers spreading, lines being crossed, violence returning to a place he had kept untouched for years. Yet when he looked again at the children, their shaking bodies and hollow eyes erased every excuse he tried to build, and he realized that danger was not only something that arrived with guns or threats, but also something that grew quietly inside a man who chose comfort over conscience. And the seconds dragged on as the storm raged louder, as if the night itself demanded an answer, and the cowboy's chest tightened because he understood that no matter what he decided, this moment would leave a mark that time could not erase. And he felt anger at the world for placing such a choice in his hands, fear of consequences he could not control, and shame at how close he was to walking away. And the woman shifted slightly, adjusting the child in her arms, a small movement that carried no accusation, only exhaustion. And that simple act broke something open inside him, because it reminded him that strength was not proven by how well a man defended his solitude, but by what he was willing to risk for those who had nothing. And as the wind pushed against the door and the fire struggled to hold its warmth, the cowboy stood between safety and sacrifice, knowing that one path protected his life as it was, while the other demanded he step into uncertainty with no promise of reward. And in that fragile balance, he finally accepted a truth he could no longer avoid, that some moments arrive only once, and the choice made within them defines not just the night, but the man who must live with it long after the storm has passed. The wind surged harder against the cabin, rattling the loose boards and forcing icy air through every narrow gap, and the children's shivering turned sharp and uncontrollable, their small bodies swaying as if the night itself was trying to pull them away. And the cowboy felt time slipping through his fingers with each breath they took, because the storm showed no patience and the cold showed no mercy. And the woman's face tightened as she sensed the danger growing, her eyes lowering not in defeat but in quiet acceptance of whatever fate waited beyond that doorway. And the youngest child let out a weak sound that barely rose above the wind, a sound that struck deeper than any scream. And the cowboy's pulse quickened as he realized how thin the line had become between life and loss. And the fire behind him flickered violently, as if struggling to survive just like those standing before him. And the night pressed closer, louder, more demanding, while the seconds stretched heavy and unforgiving. And the children leaned closer to their mother, their strength draining with each passing moment. And the cowboy's thoughts raced, calculating risks, imagining consequences, picturing faces he might never see again if things went wrong. Yet none of those imagined futures felt as real as the fragile present unfolding in front of him. And the woman's breath grew uneven, not from panic but from exhaustion earned through endless walking and quiet suffering. And the wind screamed through the darkness like a warning that no choice was also a choice. And the cowboy felt his chest tighten as he understood that waiting any longer would decide everything for him. And the children's teeth chattered so violently it echoed in the silence between gusts, and the porch seemed to shrink, trapping them all in a moment that demanded action. And the woman adjusted her stance, trying to shield the children from the cold with her own body, a futile effort that showed how little she had left to give and how much she was willing to lose. And that silent sacrifice weighed heavily on the cowboy, because it stripped away every excuse he had built inside his mind. And the storm roared louder, pushing against the door as if daring him to close it, daring him to walk away. And the fire crackled sharply, sending sparks upward like fleeting chances disappearing into smoke. And the cowboy's hand tightened against the wood, his breath slowing as he felt the truth settle deep within him, that this moment was no longer about fear or safety or old divisions, but about time running out while lives stood trembling in the cold. And as the wind howled with renewed force and the children's strength faded further, the space between hesitation and decision vanished, leaving only one fragile instant where everything still could be saved or lost forever. Without speaking, the cowboy stepped aside and pulled the door fully open, And that simple movement cut through the storm louder than any promise, because it was the first time in years he had allowed someone to cross the line he had drawn around his life, and the warmth from the fire spilled outward, wrapping the woman and her children in a breath they had almost forgotten existed. And for a moment they stood frozen, not from cold now, but from disbelief, as if the night might still take this chance away. And then the woman nodded once, a quiet sign of gratitude that carried no relief yet, only respect, and she guided the children forward with gentle urgency, their feet dragging as they crossed into the cabin, and the cowboy watched closely, every sense alert, knowing that opening the door did not end the risk, but transformed it into something he would have to face head-on. And as the door closed behind them, the storm's roar softened, replaced by the crackle of fire and the sound of strained breathing slowly easing, and the children sank toward the warmth, their shaking beginning to slow as feeling returned to their hands. And the woman lowered herself carefully, never letting go of the youngest, her shoulders finally dropping as the weight she carried pressed down all at once, and the cowboy stepped back, giving them space, unsure of where to stand in a room that suddenly felt smaller yet heavier with meaning. And he noticed how the cabin changed, how silence no longer felt empty but alive, charged with a decision that could not be undone. And he felt fear still there, sharp and honest, but it no longer ruled him, because something stronger had taken its place, something steady that told him this choice was worth whatever followed. And the woman lifted her eyes briefly, meeting his gaze without words. And in that moment he saw not a threat or a stranger, but a mother who had walked through darkness to protect her children. And that understanding settled deep within him, reshaping the way he saw the world beyond his walls. And the fire burned brighter, as if responding to the presence of life it was now asked to protect. And the children edged closer to it, their faces slowly gaining color. And the cowboy realized that courage did not arrive with noise or pride. It arrived quietly, through actions taken when no one else was watching. And as he secured the door against the storm, he accepted that this night would follow him long after the snow melted. Because he had chosen connection over isolation, responsibility over comfort, and compassion over fear. And while the wind continued to scream outside, inside the cabin a fragile peace formed, born from a single silent gesture that proved that even in the harshest places, humanity could still find a way to survive. Inside the cabin, the warmth slowly returned to the children's faces, color blooming where fear and cold had ruled only moments before, and their breathing eased into a fragile rhythm that felt like a promise being kept. And the woman watched them closely, afraid to believe the danger had passed, until she saw the tight grip of survival loosen from their small hands. And something inside her finally gave way, not in tears but in a deep release she had not felt in a long time. And she realized that this simple shelter meant more than heat. It meant that someone had chosen them when the world had offered nothing but closed doors. And the firelight danced across the rough walls, turning the cabin into a place that felt unexpectedly alive. And the cowboy moved quietly, placing water nearby, adding wood to the fire, his actions careful and respectful, as if he understood that noise might break the fragile calm forming between them. And the woman held her youngest closer, feeling the child's body grow warmer against her chest. And with that warmth came a truth she had nearly forgotten, that kindness still existed even in places shaped by cruelty. And she lifted her eyes again, not to ask for anything more, but to silently acknowledge the choice he had made. And the cowboy met her gaze briefly, then looked away, uncomfortable with gratitude yet unable to deny its power. And the children leaned closer to the fire, mesmerized by its glow, their fears slowly replaced by wonder. And the cabin filled with a quiet that felt safe rather than empty. And the woman's thoughts drifted to the road behind them, to the nights spent hiding from the cold, and the days spent searching for mercy. And she understood that this moment did not erase that journey, but it gave it meaning. And the cowboy felt the shift as well, a subtle change in the air, as if the space he had guarded so fiercely was no longer threatened by their presence, but strengthened by it. And he realized that solitude had protected him from pain, but it had also kept him distant from moments like this. Moments where life proved its worth through connection, and the fire continued to burn steady and strong, reflecting the fragile bond forming between strangers who owed each other nothing yet shared everything that mattered in that instant. and the woman closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself to rest without fear for the first time in days, trusting that the walls around them would hold. And as the storm raged outside, powerless now to reach them, the cabin stood as a small defiance against the harsh world beyond, and both the cowboy and the woman understood, without speaking, that this night had changed something permanent within them. Because warmth had done more than save bodies from the cold, it had reminded wounded hearts that humanity could still rise where it was least expected. As dawn slowly broke through the thinning storm, pale light crept across the land and revealed shapes moving along the distant horizon, and the cowboy noticed them the moment he stepped outside, his body stiffening as instinct took over, because he understood this land well enough to know that no movement at that hour was meaningless. And as the figures grew clearer against the rising sky, his heart settled into a heavy awareness rather than panic, since the choice he had made during the night had never been invisible. And inside the cabin the woman sensed the change before he spoke, feeling a quiet tension replace the calm that had allowed her children to rest, and she followed his gaze from the doorway, recognizing the silhouettes immediately, her breath catching not with fear, but with acceptance, because actions carried stories faster than words ever could, and the children stirred behind her, drawn by the light and the shift in the air, and the cowboy stood firm, knowing that the warmth he had offered had traveled far beyond his walls, reaching eyes that watched and judged from afar, and the figures continued their slow approach, unhurried and deliberate, showing neither aggression nor retreat, and with each passing moment the weight of consequence settled deeper, not as regret, but as truth. And the cowboy reflected that kindness was never a quiet act on this land. It echoed across distance and memory. And the woman placed herself slightly forward, not to challenge or hide, but to stand openly in the result of his decision. And the morning wind carried a calm unlike the night before, as if the land itself was waiting to see what would follow. And the cowboy felt no urge to reach for a weapon, because this moment demanded presence, not defense. And the figures stopped within sight, their stillness speaking louder than motion, and the silence stretched with intention, allowing understanding to form without sound. And the cowboy realized that respect often arrived disguised as uncertainty, and the woman's expression remained steady, her trust unbroken, because she had already seen what mattered most when the door opened hours earlier, and the children watched quietly, unaware of the history written into the space between adults, yet safe within the circle created by one night's mercy. And the rising sun painted the ground in gold, revealing a world that looked unchanged yet felt entirely different, and the cowboy understood that he could no longer step back into isolation even if he wanted to, because the land now carried the memory of his choice, and the figures on the horizon, witnesses to that truth, marked the beginning of consequences that were not born from fear or violence, but from a simple act seen and remembered. And as the morning settled fully around them, the cowboy stood ready to face whatever followed, not as a man guarding his solitude, but as one who had accepted that compassion, once offered, could never remain unseen. The figures advanced close enough for faces to take shape, and the cowboy felt the moment tighten like a drawn breath. Yet no shout came, no sudden charge followed, and as the warriors halted, something unexpected unfolded in the open space between them, because instead of raising their weapons, they slowly lowered them, blades turning downward, rifles resting against the earth, a gesture so deliberate it carried the weight of a spoken oath. And the silence that followed was not empty, but full, heavy with meaning that reached deeper than threat ever could. And the cowboy remained still, meeting their gaze without defiance, understanding that movement now would break a balance formed by trust. And the woman stepped forward beside him, not as a shield but as proof, her presence calm and unafraid. And the warrior's eyes shifted briefly toward the children standing safely behind her, their warmth visible even in the cold morning air. And in that shared glance a story was exchanged without words, a story of shelter given, of life protected, of an action that honored ancient values older than conflict itself. And the cowboy felt fear drain away, replaced by a steady respect that surprised him with its depth, because this was not forgiveness asked or granted, it was recognition earned. And the wind moved softly now, carrying no warning, only witness, and one of the warriors inclined his head slightly, a small motion that carried generations of meaning, and the cowboy understood that his choice had crossed boundaries drawn by blood and history, and had touched something human beneath them all. And the woman's shoulders eased as she realized the danger she had prepared for would not arrive, because honor had spoken first, and the children watched quietly, sensing that something important was happening even if they could not name it. And the morning light continued to rise, revealing a scene shaped not by power but by restraint. And the cowboy felt a rare clarity settle within him, knowing that strength had shown itself not through dominance, but through mercy recognized by those who understood its cost. And the warriors remained a moment longer, then began to step back, weapons still lowered, leaving behind not fear but respect that lingered in the air. And as distance grew between them, the cowboy knew this silence would echo far beyond the horizon, because it marked a turning point where violence chose not to arrive, and honor chose to stand instead, reshaping the land not through force, but through a shared understanding born from one quiet act of courage. On that night, a single act of courage reshaped everything. As the cowboy stood quietly watching the Apache woman and her children safe by the fire, and he realized that the warmth he had offered had done more than save bodies from the cold. It had touched hearts, rewritten fears, and created respect where suspicion had ruled for generations. And the woman looked at him with a quiet gratitude that spoke louder than words, her eyes reflecting a truth he had almost forgotten, that kindness is stronger than any weapon, that mercy has a power no force can match. And the children, once shivering and pale, now glowed with life returning, their innocence preserved by a choice made when hesitation could have cost everything. And the wind outside seemed softer, less threatening, as if even nature recognized the change. And the cowboy understood that true strength had never been about isolation or dominance, but about the courage to open one's heart, to risk everything for others. And in that moment, every soul in the cabin felt it, the quiet, unstoppable force of humanity that would linger far beyond the storm, far beyond that frozen night.